Turn on the news, and you'll see it. China slams US interference. It's a headline that seems to pop up every week, sometimes every day, flashing across our screens with a sense of urgency. The words might change, but the message is always the same. China is angry, and the world is supposed to take notice. Beijing warns against foreign meddling, or China expresses strong dissatisfaction. These phrases have become almost like background noise, so familiar that we barely register them anymore. But behind each statement is a carefully crafted message, a signal to both domestic and international audiences. It's a script on repeat, a performance of outrage, played out for the cameras and the world stage. The language is formal, the tone is stern, and the repetition is deliberate. It's not just about the specific incident, it's about drawing a line in the sand, over and over again. A US warship sails through the Taiwan Strait. Strong dissatisfaction. The Chinese government responds instantly, summoning diplomats, issuing statements, and making it clear that this is unacceptable. A Western leader meets the Dalai Lama. Firm opposition. The response is swift and predictable with with warnings of damaged relations and accusations of disrespecting China's sovereignty. New tech sanctions? Stern representation. Every move is met with a countermove, every perceived slight with a formal protest. It's a diplomatic dance that never seems to end. To many in the West, this sounds like hypersensitive paranoia, a kind of overreaction that's hard to understand. Why does China care so much about these gestures, these words, these symbolic acts? We hear talk of defending the rules-based international order, and it seems reasonable, like traffic laws for the world, designed to keep everyone safe and playing by the same rules. It's about fairness, predictability, and stability. But when Beijing hears rules-based order, they don't hear harmony or cooperation. Instead, they hear something very different, something that stirs old wounds and deep suspicions. They hear echoes of British gunboats and a history of humiliation. The phrase rules-based order is a reminder of a time when the rules were written by others, enforced by force, and used to keep China weak. For China, the first rules from the West were forced at cannon point, designed to benefit everyone but them. Treaties were signed under duress, cities were occupied, and sovereignty was stripped away. This was the start of the century of humiliation, a trauma at the heart of modern China's identity. It's not just a chapter in a history book, it's a living memory, passed down through generations, shaping how China sees itself and the world. It's not just history, it shapes every foreign policy decision, every negotiation, every press conference. The past is always present, coloring every interaction with a sense of caution and a drive to never be humiliated again. To understand China's actions today, its obsession with sovereignty, suspicion of the West, and drive for power, you have to understand that for them, the year isn't just 2026, it's also 1839. The shadow of the past stretches long, influencing every move on the global chessboard. And the war that started then never truly ended. For China, every headline, every protest, every diplomatic spat is part of a much longer story, a story of loss, recovery, and the determination to never be vulnerable again. The phrase rules-based international order sounds neat and fair, like a global game where everyone agrees to play by the same set of rules and no one gets special treatment. It's a vision of the world where order, predictability, and cooperation reign, and where disputes are settled at the table, not on the battlefield. In this ideal, the world runs smoothly, economies grow, and nations prosper together. It's a system that promises stability and peace, at least on paper. But now imagine your first encounter with these so-called rules wasn't a friendly invitation, but someone breaking down your door, selling poison, and forcing you to sign a contract that lets them keep doing it, no matter how much you protest. That's how China remembers its introduction to Western rules, not as a partnership, but as a painful lesson in powerlessness, humiliation, and exploitation. The so-called order was, for them, an act of supreme disorder, an imposition, not a negotiation. Treaties were signed at gunpoint, and the rules were written by those with the biggest guns. So when Chinese officials push back against this phrase today, they're not just being stubborn. They're tapping into a deep historical wound, a collective memory of being forced to play a rigged game. So, when a US official says abide by the rules-based order, China doesn't just hear a call for fairness. They hear, obey the order we created, which serves our interests, not yours. It's a conversation on two different frequencies, colored by two different histories, one of pride in building the system, the other of pain from being forced into it. For the West, rules are a shield for peace, a way to prevent chaos and conflict. For China, those same rules were first a sword for profit and domination, and that memory, etched into national identity, never truly dies. What were the Opium Wars really about? On the surface, it might seem like a conflict over a single drug, but the reality runs much deeper. The Opium Wars were a turning point in world history, a collision of empires, ideologies, and ambitions that would reshape the fate of nations. It wasn't just about opium. It was a clash of civilizations, a cynical power play, and a struggle for dominance between East and West. The British Empire, hungry for profit and influence, saw an opportunity to force open the doors of China, a nation that had long considered itself the center of the world. Britain craved Chinese goods, silk, porcelain, and especially tea, but China demanded silver in return, refusing British manufactured goods. This created a massive trade deficit for Britain, draining its silver reserves and threatening its economy. The British East India Company devised a ruthless solution: opium. Grown in colonial India, opium was smuggled into China on a massive scale. The result was a wave of addiction that swept across Chinese society, reversing the flow of silver and destabilizing the nation. By the 1830s, millions of Chinese people were addicted. Families were torn apart, productivity plummeted, and the Chinese economy spiraled into crisis. The social fabric of the nation began to unravel. Commissioner Lin Zexu, a determined and principled official, tried to stop the trade. He destroyed tons of opium and wrote passionate appeals to British morality, hoping to end the suffering of his people. But Britain responded not with compassion, but with force. The Royal Navy, the most powerful in the world, was dispatched to China's shores, ready to impose British will at the barrel of a gun. The result wasn't a war in the traditional sense, it was a massacre. British firepower overwhelmed Chinese defenses, leaving devastation in its wake. British gunboats crushed China's outdated military, blockaded vital ports, and bombarded cities into submission. The Qing dynasty was powerless to resist. China, once the proud Middle Kingdom, was utterly humiliated. Its leaders were forced to bow before foreign powers, and its people suffered the consequences. The Treaty of Nanking forced China to pay huge indemnities, cede the island of Hong Kong, and open its ports to foreign merchants and laws. It marked the beginning of what the Chinese called the Century of Humiliation. It was a treaty signed at gunpoint, with no real choice for China. The balance of power had shifted, and the world would never be the same. The lesson was clear and brutal. Weakness invites exploitation. The Opium Wars left scars that still shape China's view of the world today. China's first brutal lesson: weakness is an invitation for exploitation. For centuries, China saw itself as the center of civilization, protected by culture and tradition. But British industrial might shattered that illusion. The Treaty of Nanking proved it. China lost territory, paid huge sums, and saw its laws overridden. The century of humiliation followed, with China carved up by foreign powers. Today, every Chinese strategist operates from one premise: never be weak again. This drives China's military modernization and its quest for strategic depth. Building artificial islands, advanced missiles, and a world-class navy isn't just about power. It's about ensuring no one can ever kick down the door again. Never again is more than a slogan. It's policy. The second lesson: trade is a weapon, not just an exchange. Britain used trade as a pretext for profit, then used force to protect those profits. For China, free trade meant being forced open, addicted, and impoverished. This bred deep suspicion of economic interdependence, especially when China is the weaker party. Today, China's economic strategy is about self-sufficiency and turning the tables. Initiatives like Made in China 2025 and Belt and Road are about dominating key industries and supply chains. When the US sanctions Chinese tech, Beijing sees a repeat of history and doubles down on independence. The goal: become indispensable, so no one can use trade as a weapon against China again. The third lesson: international law is not neutral, it's written by the powerful. The Treaty of Nanking introduced extraterritoriality, letting foreigners in China live by their own laws. It was a violation of sovereignty, creating colonial enclaves. China learned that law can be a tool for conquest, not justice. This cynicism persists. When The Hague ruled against China in the South China Sea, Beijing dismissed it as irrelevant. To China, Western-led legal bodies are just new versions of old impositions. That's why China builds its own institutions and seeks influence in global organizations. If you don't help write the rules, you play a rigged game. The memory of humiliation isn't just history, it's a driving force in China's foreign policy. The Communist Party claims legitimacy by ending the century of humiliation and restoring China's place in the world. Every foreign policy challenge is framed as resisting foreign bullying. Taiwan is seen as the last unhealed wound, kept separate by foreign intervention. US arms sales or visits to Taiwan are viewed as echoes of past meddling. Trade and tech disputes are seen as efforts to keep China down, just like the British did. The West's moral arguments fall flat. China remembers the poppy fields and gunboats. This narrative is taught in schools, displayed in museums, and used to justify policy. The ghost of humiliation is both a tool for mobilization and a genuine lens for seeing the world. Invoking the Opium Wars isn't just emotional, it's strategic. The humiliation narrative unites the population and justifies the party's rule. It explains limits on freedoms and a strong security state as necessary to prevent chaos. Internationally, it reframes criticism as neo-colonial bullying. China claims to be both a rising power and a wounded nation, justifying assertiveness as self-defense. This duality lets Beijing justify military buildup, economic expansion, and diplomatic stonewalling. The historical software is always running, shaping assumptions and red lines. Disputes over trade or territory become existential battles for dignity. For China, history is a live training ground for the present. So, where are we now? The China-West relationship is a tense, complicated marriage haunted by an ugly past. The West asks China to be a responsible stakeholder in an order built on its own subjugation. China responds, "We will never let you have power over us again." The Opium War is a living lesson for China, a reminder that law, trade, and morality are tools of the powerful. To understand China's actions, you have to see the long shadow of history behind every headline. China isn't just rising, it's trying to reverse a verdict handed down at cannon point. The goal, a world where China sets the rules, or at least can't have rules imposed on it. Until then, the curtain is still up, and we're all in the audience.